Wait.
Hey, we're going.
Oh,
Hey, strong ones, thank you so much for tuning in. Today we have Michael, who already is jumped in and is eager to go. So Michael, welcome to the show.
thank you for having me.
Yeah. Now are you the creator, owner of the Kettlebell Partner Pass organization certification thing? What is this?
Yeah. Yes. And what it is it's still being explored and understood.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it is my baby.
Uh-huh.
I'm not the first person to ever throw a kettlebell,
Right.
so I'm not claiming that. Um, so that I didn't invent, but what I did innovate is the progressions and the patterns. So
Okay.
the patterning and the progressions.
Okay. So a lot of the listeners on the show have trained with kettlebells or are intrigued with kettlebells. So can you explain just the mechanics of what the partner pass is if no one has seen it?
Yeah. So okay. So the partner pass is just basically the two-hand swing, and instead of the float at the top of your swing, you're actually letting go of the bell, and you're passing it to your partner, and they are catching the bell and returning it to you. And this is done for as many reps as you decide, or as long as you can. The test for certification is actually an hour straight of passing, no stopping, no dropping.
That's intense.
It is intense, yeah.
Now, why an hour? Is that more of like an endurance thing, a mental thing, both?
Uh, it's more of a mental thing. It is an endurance thing for sure.
Yeah.
But you're familiar with time slowing down and time speeding up in different circumstances.
Yeah.
So we all know that an hour is a long period of time, but it's not an indefinite period of time.
Okay.
So I can hang out with a friend and the hour goes by in the blink of an eye.
Mm-hmm.
I can be studying something I really don't want to have to study, and an hour seems like days.
Right.
So it's a practice in compression of time. It's it's an opportunity to explore the boundaries of an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also a process. So you can't just walk into an hour passing and be like, all right, I'm going to throw for an hour.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could, but a lot of people overestimate themselves and some people underestimate themselves and will say, I think I could probably do 20 minutes, or God, I couldn't do 2.
Right.
And usually the people who say I couldn't do 2, they end up doing, 5 to 7. And the people who say I could do 20, no problem, they end up doing 5 to 7. So it's a practice and preparation as well. So it's a lot of things.
Yeah. So with that hour, have a lot of people found that time has sped up within that hour? Because I know there's been times in my athletics where it's a really quick movement or quick performance where it felt like time just completely stopped. So I'm curious if that hour seems to go by fast. And you're saying no.
Not really.
Okay.
No, there's nothing fast about it. So I've been through the hour twice, and this past weekend I tested another potential instructor.
Okay.
And we made it 31 minutes, and that 31 minutes felt like an hour. So
wow. Okay.
yeah. In the beginning, maybe the first 20 minutes or so, you start to feel like, oh yeah, I could do this for a couple hours. And then you hit about 45 minutes and you're just like, holy shit.
Yeah.
How much more time?
Right.
So
yeah.
In theory, if the student is prepared and they've done their work, the hours should go by fast, but I haven't experienced it yet. And I don't know if it will happen because it's just a theory, right?
Right. Yeah. So if someone were to want to get this, do they have to do the hour with you, or can they do it if I wanted to do this and I have a friend who loves kettlebells and wants to train this way too, and we both do an hour and send the video. Is that a possibility, or do they have to come it down and do it with you?
Well, that's a great question. So initially I thought it would be people work with each other and then they teach each other. And I had several beta tests where people were trying to make it through. So I have a 90-day protocol leading into the hour passing, and they were trying to make it through the 90 days and find people to commit with you.
Right.
Or yourself, even yourself committing for that long. For a lot of people is not easy, but I'm also trying to weed people out who don't belong. I mean, it's not for everyone.
Right.
But the people who it's for, it's for. So that's to be determined right now for the first phase of instructors. They'll come through. And I foresee that group of instructors.
Oh, hold up. You're breaking up. Can you talk a little bit more about, I know. I think we're good. Can you talk a little bit more about the instructors who've gone through it?
Sure. What would you like to know about them?
Oh, well, just what you were saying beforehand.
Okay. So when I conceived of the idea, when I was just like, okay, is it possible? I had passed with a friend for 50 minutes.
Okay.
And we didn't know we had passed for 50 minutes. So to your point of, can time feel like it speeds up and the hour goes in a blink of an eye? That 50-minute period did. We were also using a much lighter weight. We were using a 16 kg.
Okay.
And we didn't have any intention of time frame. We were just talking and having a good time and laughing and joking. And we set the bell down, and I just, for whatever reason, looked at the time and I was like, wow. And I said, how long do you think we were throwing for? He says, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes.
Yeah.
50. And so that was kind of what got my mind going, and where I really started to think, could I do it for an hour? And then I thought, well, a 16, that's probably just a little on the light side, because that was so easy to get to that place.
Right.
So I had a friend down in San Diego who was interested in kettlebells, and I started showing him some of the passing stuff and some juggling and things like that. And I told him about my idea, and he's kind of an extreme guy, and he was like, yeah, totally, let's do it. So I started training him for it. And with him, we trained for about 6 weeks. It was about the time frame that he and I actually put energy towards the hour. Okay. Yeah. And we completed the hour. And then
so what bell did you use for that hour?
24 kg, so 53 pounds.
Yeah.
So then I thought, okay, well, this is great. I've been through it. I know what it's like. People can't say it's not possible, or this, that, and the other thing, or it's because you're a high level kettlebell practitioner and you've been doing it for so long, because he hadn't been doing kettlebells. So he was basically, he had done CrossFit style kettlebells. So he had done some American style swings and stuff, but it was never like the meat and potatoes of his training diet. It was more of like a garnish. So I thought, well, I need to see if people can actually, commit to 90 days. And if they can they pass it on their own? Kind of the way you were talking about. And I approached these two gentlemen in LA, Mike Scott and Chris Hook, and both of them are SFGs. And I told them what I wanted to do, and they were on board, and I put them through the 90 days. At the end of each week, I would assess what they were doing, whether they were actually moving in the direction I wanted them to go in, or if they were deviating. And for the most part, they were right on task, and they ended up doing the full 90 days and passing.
Oh, cool.
But then I thought, okay, so they're both high level. They're both very skilled. So now I need to find people who aren't necessarily as skilled, or maybe one is skilled and one is not, or, this kind of thing. So I got 3 more pairs of people who were interested, and I worked towards putting them on the 90-day protocol, and none of them were able to make the 90 days except for a pair of females. And they did really, really well. The only thing that they didn't do was they didn't meet their minimum. So I basically require a minimum of 3 days a week, minimum 20 minutes.
Okay.
Maximum 6 days a week, still minimum 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So it's not a lot of work. It's just a lot of work over time.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And they didn't pass. So then I started thinking, okay, maybe this particular progression is not ideal. Maybe this doesn't serve where I'm at right now. Mm-hmm. So I had a friend, or I still have a friend. He just one. I only have one. Well, I have two now.
Right.
Because we're friends, right?
Right. Yeah.
So I got two. My circle's growing.
Right.
He travels a lot. He's a bit of what he likes to call a flow mad. So he doesn't really live any one place.
Uh-huh.
And so my thought process around him was, well, he's not going to be able to do the 90 days. And how's he going to find somebody who can actually, train themselves to be ready for an hour? So that's not really fair. Mm-hmm. So I told him, if you get the 90 days in, I trust that you do it. You're the only person that I'm going to allow this for, mm-hmm. but you do your 90 days and then I'll test you. Mm-hmm. And he said, okay, that's fair. And so we did that for about a year and a half. And there was a few times where he felt like he was ready. And just recently he tested, and he's the one who made it 31 minutes.
Oh, okay.
Didn't pass. So now we're going to put him on a more regimented program that I'll oversee a little more, mm-hmm. and be able to guide him a little further. But prior to, go ahead.
Well, my question is what qualifies people to not pass? Is it the fact that they drop a bell? Do they get tired? Do they set it down? Like, what are the criteria within that hour that disqualifies them?
All you got to do is make it to the end of the hour without dropping or stopping.
Okay.
Right. So you better be tired at the end. If you're not tired, right. I don't know. I don't know if you're human. On
average, how many swings is that?
I think the last guy who passed did the calculations, and I think it was like 1440.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it's a fair amount.
Yeah.
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 So prior to the gentleman who just attempted last weekend, it was last Sunday, actually, not the one we just had, but the Sunday before that. Okay. He came out. So I offered the same thing to him, but different. He basically went through 3 partners, and it wasn't working out. And he's very gifted at, mm-hmm. partner passing, and I really would like for him to become an instructor. So I just said, listen, I know you've done well over 90 days, because he trains people every day, mm-hmm. and every day he incorporates it into his training. Mm-hmm. So I said, all right, I'll test you. And he was like, really? And I was like, I will test you. And he's like, okay, great. So he came out to Albuquerque to help with a workshop. And before he came out, I just said, hey, if you want to take your test when you're here, we can do that. So I totally forgot I told him that. And he comes out for the workshop. We have a great workshop. Everybody had a great time. Uh-huh. Everybody understood the underlying meanings of why we do KPP. Uh-huh. And we went out and we played pinball until like 3 a.m.
Oh, no.
And then we went to bed and woke up the next day and went and got breakfast. And he goes, I think I want to test today. And I was just like, oh, shit. Okay. All right, let's do this.
Yeah.
So fortunately, Czar over at Fire Bells was kind enough to let us use their space and their one of their bells, and we occupied the back of their gym for a little over an hour, because there's some setup and then of course cleanup. And he passed, and we had some intense moments. And
yeah, I bet.
Yeah, it was a profound experience. I noticed at the end of your email, it said, hey, who would be potentially good to have on your podcast? Well,
oh, yeah.
Maybe it would be good for you to talk to one of them about their experience, because both of them described it as being spiritual in nature.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I guess that's where my next question goes. You mentioned something about like the underlying meaning of the Kettlebell Partner Passing. Can you explain what those are?
I can explain some of what they are. A lot of it's about feel, but what can be verbally said is it's about connection and communication It's about vulnerability, intimacy, trust. It's about entering a flow state with another human being.
Yeah.
It's about sustaining a connection for prolonged periods of time.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of, I like to call it the antidote for what we're doing right now.
Mm-hmm.
Like we have a virtual connection.
Mm-hmm.
And as cool as it is to see you, that's why I asked you, do you do these things in person? Because I much prefer to be in the energy of the individual.
Right.
Although I do get a fairly good idea of your energy.
Yeah.
And that's also why I asked you, hey, are you be around for the workshop in Seattle? Because I would love to.
Oh, you're breaking up.
No!
I know. It's all good. I think we got all of it. You're saying about just that human connection. And if I do
Human connection.
These in person, and I actually did do my first interview in person with some of my clients. Maybe it was at the beginning of the month. I don't remember.
Nice.
But it was so much fun. So
right?
I think that's what the next step is. I'll take the podcast is like having people come to me.
Yeah. And I think you should, because I think, or you can go to them. That's
True.
Awesome too.
Who knows what the future holds for me right now?
Yeah.
I've read a couple posts that people have said about their experience with partner passing, and similar along the lines of what you were saying of that intimacy and that connection and that trust. You talk a lot about how well you pass the kettlebell really sets the person up, and how you're transferring that energy into someone else, and how you return the pass. Can you talk a little bit more about like that flow of the kettlebell going back and forth on the physical aspect, but also how does that relate on just like an everyday life of our energy exchange to other people?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that. So one of the things I often say to people is you give what you get, or you get what you give. Yeah, a little of both, actually. So if, say, for instance, you and I are throwing kettlebells, and I don't give you a very good pass, it makes it really hard for you to give me a good pass back, because you have to compensate for what I've thrown you. But if I give you a sweetheart pass, or a really good pass that not only is easy for you to catch, but really sort of helps you get into your hinge, it's a lot easier for you to return it to me in a similar fashion. So how that carries over is it's really all about communication. Like if you feed me a good question, I can give you a good answer. If you ask me something that is irrelevant to what we're talking about, the answer is going to be maybe okay, but it's not going to necessarily promote the flow of what you're trying to accomplish with your podcast. So one of the things that people often say, especially people who train KPP over time, is that it applies to all areas of your life. It's not just in that moment. How you treat others ultimately is reflected back to you. So you get immediate feedback with the kettlebell though. So if I throw you a great pass and you throw me a great pass back, it's not just because you're really great at passing. It's because we created a great pass together. Right. So a lot of people think, so because I've been doing, this is my 14th year of kettlebells passing. Oh, so wow. I can pretty much give a decent pass regardless of what comes at me, but that's at a cost to me. That taxes me, but I can still do it. Ideally, I'm not getting taxed and you're not getting taxed when we pass with each other. And that's, again, to your point of, can the hour just speed by? Yes, it can, if we've both done our individual work. Yeah. So you could take that a lot of different ways as to how that applies to day-to-day life.
So this is maybe a little bit off topic, but as we're talking about passing, my mind is going to the episode of Friends where they're passing, a tennis ball, and seeing how long they can keep it going. Nice. But I think it also goes into the fact of just like the fun aspect. Does this bring and spark more of just like that childlike spirit of playfulness when you pass the kettlebell?
Totally.
Yeah.
And that's a big part of why I do it. I mean, let's be honest. How fun is it to just stand and do hundreds of swings? I mean, at first it was really cool, but that was, 2001. This is 2019. I can only play with myself so much.
Right.
I like including other people. So the thing about passing that's different is I never know what you're going to throw me. So I have to be able to adapt. So it's always different. So I can't plan my training, but when I'm swinging a kettlebell, I control it. I'm in control all the time.
Right.
So I have to let go, and I have to trust you. I have to trust myself to be able to field whatever you throw at me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's fun. It's a game. Have you seen any of the freestyle stuff that we do?
With Azar, is that what you're referring to? Like where you guys are like moving and like almost like a juggle between the bell and another person?
Yeah, it's like a dance kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's the goal. So this first wave of instructors, I want to get people to the point where they can learn how to do freestyle. Because after freestyle comes 2 bells, and after 2 bells comes 3 bells, and after 3 comes 3 bells comes 4 bells, right? So I don't have that many people that I can play with at that level. Right. So
yeah.
I have quite a few who I can freestyle with now. Mm-hmm. And after freestyle comes multiple partners. So you have, several people throwing the bell or several people throwing multiple bells.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one thing, one of the reasons why I love training with kettlebells is because of that awareness and that feedback that the kettlebell really gives you to your movement. And I'm a big believer of like our subconscious, which I believe is our superconscious, lives within our body, and how that really has brought and sparked more of this self-awareness and really listened into what I consider to be the spirit of your body. And you mentioned a couple of things I want to talk about is the importance of letting go,
yes.
When to be in control and when not to be in control. And how aware, my first question is, how aware does someone need to be of themselves and their own like subconscious movements to join in with partner passing? Or does that intrigue it a little bit more for people to be more in tune with their body?
What do you mean by does it intrigue it?
I guess maybe intrigue is not like the right word for the question, but does it allow people to be more in tune with their body in a way that training individually with just one bell doesn't?
Absolutely. So when we stand face to face, the first thing that happens is I make people look at each other's eyes to let each other know that they're present and paying attention. That's the number one most important thing. So automatically it demands presence of people. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times, I don't know about you, but I can swing the kettlebell, and oftentimes at this point in my career, I can check out and I'm thinking about other things. But if I have somebody in front of me and I have responsibility for their well-being as well as my own, I don't check out. Like I have to be right there. So automatically it brings more presence into the body. And then we face fear together. So we're dealing with emotions that you may have felt initially when you were starting to use the kettlebell, but those eventually go away once your confidence builds. I never stand in front of somebody up to this point. I have not stood in front of anyone where I'm like, oh, I don't feel fear right now. So if somebody tells me, oh, I don't feel fear, I'm like, either you're a sociopath, psychopath, or you're lying.
Right.
And whatever it is, when you start passing, you quickly determine whether or not you want to keep passing with that person.
Has there been a time where you're like, okay, we're done. Like the connection wasn't there, or the present wasn't there, or like they just, that self-awareness wasn't there, and you're like, we just need to be done. And like, yes. Okay.
And you got to make those calls.
Yeah.
And those are hard calls to make. I've thrown with friends who are having partnership issues, and their mind was just not there.
Yeah.
And they kept missing, kept dropping, and at a certain point you just have to call it and say, hey, you know what? today's not the day.
Right.
You need to, because you are throwing a cannonball at each other.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
let's be honest.
Yeah.
It's dangerous.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if they don't immediately, and most people immediately show up. I mean, it's very
Mhm.
rare for somebody not to. And if somebody's got that much going on, they probably shouldn't be, doing anything that involves projectiles.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
How has training this way with the partner passing kept you and other people more present throughout their life?
Well, I commute on a bicycle,
Mhm.
so I feel like my awareness is much broader than it
Mhm.
was prior to doing this, and I'm a lot more alert and aware of my surroundings.
Mhm.
Early on, when you start throwing a kettlebell, your focus is on the kettlebell, and then
Mhm.
eventually it goes to your partner. But as you grow within the system, you start to learn how to open your awareness not just to what's happening with you, but what's going on all around you.
Mhm.
So that's one way how it's affected me. I can't really speak to other people's experiences, but I hope that you have other KP peers on your show and are able to ask them that, because I'd be curious to know myself.
Yeah. We'll have to get in contact with some of them for that. You mentioned fear, and I guess this is more of like a twofold question because of the partner passing. There's a aspect of letting go um, and facing fear together. Can you just talk a little bit more about those two and more of like the spirituality and the emotional training that the partner training provides?
So the fear, facing the fear and the letting go.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the fear doesn't last very long. The fear is just initial,
Okay.
and usually the fear of being seen.
Yeah.
And I think in regards to spirituality, most of us are not seen, even though we are these spiritual beings
Mm-hmm.
running around in these like skin suits. Um, it's very rare that someone actually sees you,
Yeah.
sees that part of you, because we're so focused on material stuff, and it's drilled into us that that's what we're supposed to focus on.
Right.
So that initial state of fear is, yes, there's a projectile coming at you that could do damage, but it's also, I'm not used to having prolonged eye contact with somebody.
Yeah.
They're going to see me. They're going to
Yeah.
see the parts of me that I reserve for people that I care about deeply, or that I don't share with anyone.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually where the letting go comes in.
Yeah.
So you have to let go of that. Otherwise, this co-creation that you're about to engage in can't happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's very symbolic of the bigger picture and spirituality. Like you can't have spiritual experience if you're not willing to let go of material desires.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying material desires are bad. I'm just
Right.
simply saying, if that's a strong focus, it's a lot harder to have spiritual experience. At least that's been my experience.
Mm-hmm.
So does that kind of touch on
Yeah.
what you're...
Yeah. No, I'm intrigued with the fact that you said like fear is just you feel it just the initial part of it, and how once you start moving, that's overcome.
It goes away.
Yeah. And it's, my mind is like, now I'm like, okay, I'm ready to try this now. Like, let's do this. But it's just fascinating for me because and this is the importance of movement, physical movement within the spiritual aspect of things. If we just stay there, the fear grows, versus if we move together through it and how that dissipates.
Yeah.
And I think you touched on a really important part of just the fact of being seen
Yeah.
in the physical, and the fact that this forces people to look each other in the eyes, which in today's society, I don't know how many times I'll go to a coffee shop or check out and I try to, engage and say thank you and look them in the eyes, and they're just so checked out they don't even look up.
Yeah.
So I think that's fascinating. Have you had anyone get into the emotional aspect of this? Just because I know for my own personal workouts, most of the time I work out by myself for numerous reasons, but one of the reasons is like sometimes I'll end up in a pile of tears versus just sweat.
Yeah.
and I'm working out a lot of emotional stuff that I've been carrying. Have you experienced that yourself, or have you had people in the partner passing get to that place?
Yeah. It's actually quite common.
Yeah.
Uh, and it's very much unexpected.
Uh-huh.
People come in, and maybe it's because I don't necessarily express to people that that's a possibility.
Yeah.
I generally don't. I keep it very much on the, this is an exercise system, even though that's the last thing that it is.
Yeah.
Um, and it's, I probably, and you know what? Thanks to this conversation, I'm just going to start talking more about that aspect of it,
Yeah.
because I always feel like the exercise world doesn't want that.
Mm.
But the reality is the exercise world needs it, and possibly a coffee enema too. But that was a joke.
I was like, wait, what? You got me. You just dodged me. I thought.
You have a great smile.
Thank
You're welcome. So, and all kidding aside, yeah, it happens quite a bit, and
hmm
it's beautiful when it happens because it brings the whole group together,
hmm
and people see vulnerability, and it gives people permission to not have to hide their emotions and bottle things up. It says, yeah, you know, it's okay. It's
hmm
okay if you aren't stiff upper lipped
hmm
and are able to handle everything with a smile.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
there's I don't have permission to talk about some of
Right.
the
Of course.
situations, and I
Right.
wish I did,
Right.
because recently there was one that, you know, it touched me very deeply,
hmm
and it was just an amazing experience to see this person let go, and
Yeah.
to feel them. You know, I don't know how long that emotion had been bottled up inside
hmm
of them, but
hmm
they let it go, and it was
Yeah.
healing for me.
Yeah.
And
Well, go ahead. Keep talking.
I was just super thankful to get to be a part of that. And
hmm
when I started doing this, I had no idea what it was going to become.
Right.
I didn't know, but as I've done it more and more, and I've tried multiple times to share it with the world, and it was met with resistance.
Uh-huh.
Um, but I think it was because I didn't have these pieces in place, and I wasn't ready. You
Yeah.
know, I wasn't ready to be vulnerable with the world and say, hey, look,
Mhm.
this is what I have to offer. And you know what, it's may not be your cup of tea, and if it's not, go do something else. But
Yeah.
if it is your cup of tea, I promise you it'll be something that will be fulfilling, and it will be
Mhm.
something that helps you better understand yourself in ways that nothing else I've ever done has.
Mhm. Well, and just what you said of how it was healing for you, I feel so convicted. I signed up for a healing dance class series, and this past weekend I was just a ball of emotions. Felt like it was, I don't want to say out of control, but I just didn't feel safe to be in a group of people, and to move my body in a way that would stir up some of those emotions, because I didn't know how I was going to react or how my body would react to it.
Yeah.
Um, so I myself still like fight that resistance of healing, but it made me realize I let that group down to a certain degree, because me showing up in that way, just as like that person did for you, and how it was healing for you, and it touched you in a deep place too because of that connection.
Yeah.
And working with people, and I know I mentioned this on another interview, as I started really diving in more into the emotional, not, I wouldn't say, yeah, I would say the emotional body of like really healing my body, and really diving into understanding some of the chakras and what some of my muscle tensions and the correlations between those two, which I'm still learning, and realizing, okay, this might be because of this emotion where my body's holding on to. The more I dove into that and really specifically started training with the kettlebells with my clients, a lot of my clients started opening up to me with um, some of the abuse that they've experienced physically, with like domestic violence, sexual abuse, even just like the trauma that they experienced in work. Um, so it's fascinating for me to see the correlation of doing this type of body work and how that allows like a gateway for the voice to feel safe almost to release it. As a health
excuse me, sorry.
No, it's all good. How do you, because there's that connection, how do you get back to your body after experience like that? Because I know there's times after I've had like a really deep session with a client, or if there was it could be in like a deep conversation, or for your experience, it was just a deep movement. You were moved deeply. How do you acknowledge that, but get back to your body and not take some of their pain with you? If that makes sense.
Yeah. How do I not do like a reverse transference?
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, there's a few things. I generally do some process work and communicate with the person and have dialogue, and that usually is extremely helpful, especially like in a situation like the one that I was referring to. It was so profound for them as well as it was for me that when they took ownership, like there's no reason for me to misguide that energy onto myself. So I think in a situation like you're talking about, you didn't feel safe in this dance class last weekend. Perhaps, you said you let the group down, but perhaps the group let you down and didn't create a safe enough container. So like, if I was in that situation, I would ask myself those questions. So I also dialogue with me. Like, did I let the group down, or was the group letting me down? Did I hold appropriate space for him, or was I projecting onto him my issues or my situation? So that's a big way. And then time in nature is huge. Like being in the trees, at the ocean, barefoot is a wonderful way. Have you ever floated? Have you ever done a float tank? Yeah, I think that's a great way to be alone with yourself and your thoughts, and to kind of close yourself off from everything. Massage is amazing, but that one's a little tricky because you're now inviting another energy in. But if you have, so I like having long-standing relationships with the therapist, so that over time I kind of can understand what's their energy and what's my energy. Whereas if I go to a new massage therapist, it's a little more challenging because I don't know them. I don't recognize the energy, and it takes a while to learn it. But I think the big thing is, another one for me is riding my bicycle. I like getting on my bike and just riding and processing. It's rhythmic, so I get into a meditative state very quickly on it. And then also being in fresh air and sort of that freedom you felt as a kid when you were riding your bike. So those things kind of bring me back to a time when I remember feeling very grounded. So I think anything that can anchor you to a time when you really felt who you were is a good way to do it. That's how I do it. How do you do it?
Well, I think it's a little bit different just because like my schedule, I have clients back to back. So if it is a heavier session or something like that, I'll just make sure I wash my hands. That's a habit that I always had. But I think I've consciously have made of like, okay, that was then, and I don't want to bring that energy into the next session. And so I always just have really tried to focusing on just washing my hands and resetting myself that way. Sometimes I'll get a mist and spray my face just to get a fresh perspective. So I think those are some of the ways that I have done that. I find it sometimes interesting. My body will crave beets, like a rooted food. I crave beets all the time. I don't know what that all means, but
how do you eat your beets?
Just whole foods.
Whole foods, so like roasted whole foods beets.
Roasted whole beets,
do you ever eat pickled beets?
I don't think so.
I'd be curious.
You're breaking up now. What were you saying about
back?
You're back. What were you saying about pickled beets?
I was saying that I hope you try them. And
Okay.
if you do, I would love to hear about your experience and what your thoughts are on them.
Okay. I'll make note of that next time at Whole Foods. I'll look
Pickled
for
beets.
pickled beets.
Yes.
Do you have any, if you're willing, any personal stories of how training with kettlebells have helped you heal some of possible either trauma or hard situations in life, in that emotional aspect?
Sure. Well, they definitely have helped me transition out of relationships. So
Mm-hmm.
endings of relationships, and deaths. Uh,
Yeah.
I, I use kettlebells to process. Um, I definitely have found that with the passing, um, it's more grounded because I have a witness to see what I'm going through.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's definitely a powerful way that I like to utilize them. Um, I would say death even. Well, and end of relationships is a form of
It's a form
death.
of death. I was just going to say, let's dive into this death conversation. I don't know. This sounds sounding morbid, but I love talking about death. Just
All right, I'm a huge fan.
okay.
So where do you want to start? We can talk about death all night.
All right.
Um,
But this is one thing, and I look at nature, and my sisters and back in 2015, we did a big road trip down the 101 and went and spent some time in the redwoods. And there was this one ginormous tree that had fallen and it was dead, but it was still giving so much life to the ecosystem. And I just sat there and just like was in awe of this tree and how much it was still giving, even though technically it was dead.
yeah,
And so I thought through that time, I was like, death brings life. Um,
absolutely.
can you add on
And
to that? I'm curious of like your thoughts on that.
yeah, well, death is life.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. Like, I used to look at it as it's a separate thing. Like,
Hmm.
you live and then you die, but living and dying are part of the same experience.
Right.
And so I lived at a monastery for a while, and the monks, one of their daily practices is to meditate on death.
Oh,
And I
fascinating.
thought, yeah, and I was like, well, is it in relation to scripture? Is it in relation to, something that's in your tradition? And it wasn't. It was just death. Like,
Uh-huh.
what is death? What does it mean? What does it mean to me? Where am I in relation to death?
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that we don't really think about that often. But when
Hmm.
you start thinking about it on a regular basis, or if you have you had any near death experiences?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you have a near death experience, and those types of things, they put you into a different mind frame or perspective.
Hmm.
Or you watch a loved one or loved ones die.
Hmm.
If you're lucky enough to see a loved one pass and they're at peace with their passing, you
Hmm.
recognize it's not an end, it's a beginning.
Hmm.
You see this.
Oh, I'm so
And
excited you're saying this because I'm like, yeah. Honestly, like I think like I hope I get to a place in my life where I know my life is coming to an end and I can look at it and like this is the greatest adventure of it all. Like this is the greatest unknown.
yeah, like what's on the other side?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Now, with the concept of death
yeah.
and what?
I said, yeah,
Oh,
just like I'm active
I
listening.
okay, great. I'm not used to that.
Sorry.
No, it's all good. Um, I find that if you allow either a death of a relationship or if you experience a death of a loved one, how that can spark and ignite something new within you that you didn't even know. Have you found that to be true with your experiences?
Yeah, well, yeah, pretty much every death of a loved one that I've experienced in the last 20 years has added to my path, has
Mm-hmm.
either shown me a direction or asked me to step up in a way that I didn't know I could, or
Mm-hmm.
um, to bear witness to emotion that I potentially wouldn't have experienced otherwise.
Mhm.
So I think it's an initiation of sorts when you lose loved ones.
Mhm.
Um, it's not a fun one, but it is one, and it does ask you to either choose to go deeper into sleep or to fully awaken to life and
Mhm.
appreciate what you have available to you moving forward, because you don't know when it's going to end. And
Mhm.
that's the big learning, is like the only thing we have is this moment, right?
Mhm.
So I mean, this could be my last conversation, right? So
Mhm.
I want to enjoy it. I want to have fun. I want to, you know, be as much of a light as I can, regardless of what's going on in my life.
Mhm.
And to be able to pay honor in a way to the people who've
Mhm.
gone before me, who helped raise me, and who even if they didn't help raise me, helped grow me,
Mhm.
you know. Uh,
Mhm.
but yeah, I think we lose sight of what's important. But I
Mhm.
think a healthy dose of death will put that right front and center. And as hard as it is, and as challenging as it is to deal with grief, um, I think those are the things that sort of recalibrate our compasses and show us what our true north is.
Mhm. Do you know Alan Watts or are familiar with him?
Never met him, but I do know who Alan Watts is.
Yeah, because he talks a lot about the importance of like how we should think about death and what that like brings up in our mind of like, well, I haven't, a lot of times when I do that, I'm like, well, I haven't done this, I haven't accomplished this. And that gives me like that motivation of like, oh, I really should get like my butt in action on some of these things, right? Um, with that said, what's the balance between mourning the death and then taking action after a death? Do you know what I mean by that?
Hmm.
Okay.
So what I think you're asking is, um, like how much time and energy do you put into the mourning
Mhm.
of it, and at what point do you step back into your life and
Yeah.
not let it be an excuse to not live?
Right. Mhm.
I think that's a great question, and I think that's a very uh, personal question, and I think it depends on your relationship.
Mhm.
um, I think sometimes it just overtakes you.
Mm.
I think
Mhm.
some grief and mourning is bigger than we could have possibly imagined, and maybe we've prepared ourselves for the passing of certain people.
Mhm.
And when that passing comes, I think you should take action immediately, but I think you should honor the mourning. And if it's incapacitating, action could mean not doing anything.
Mhm.
Action could mean, isolating yourself for a little while and really feeling it.
Mhm.
Action could mean reaching out to a loved one and asking if they have the time, space, and emotional availability to support you through a process.
Mhm.
Or it could just mean pretending like it didn't happen and just keep walking forward until you have the strength to deal with it.
Mm.
So I don't
Yeah.
think there's really an adequate answer for your question, but I do
Mhm.
believe that um, probably one of the worst things we can do is try to avoid it with things like drugs and alcohol and sex or whatever else we use to not
Mhm.
feel that kind of stuff.
Mhm. And
Um,
even, I mean, even exercise can be a place where we numb our body. So any form of anything that numbs our body away from the pain, I think that's where we're denying our own healing process through feeling and acknowledging the pain of death, of either a physical death or um, a death of a dream. I am something I talk about in my book is about like the importance of mourning a dream. Like even if you had a dream and it doesn't come to what you thought it would be,
hmm.
mourning that. It could be, a mourning of a relationship, whatever it is. Um, if we numb ourselves, we're denying that mourning because we are almost acknowledging us to stay in that place of numbness because you can't move forward with being numb. Do you
So
agree?
yeah, I do. What would you say is the most important reason to acknowledge or to mourn
Mm.
the death of, let's just say it takes something it's a little less um, obvious, like a dream. Like what is the importance from your
Mm-hmm.
perspective of mourning that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the importance, in, at least like if you had a dream, like I had a dream of being a college athlete that never happened in my life.
Uh-huh.
Um, and I had to mourn that and acknowledge that so I could also still acknowledge that I do have other athletic abilities
Mm,
to move forward. So I think the point of mourning is to acknowledge that whatever happened, say a dream or a goal that you had, didn't come true, to mourn that in a way that allows you to continue to dream. Because if we
mm,
don't mourn it and don't give it that proper, I would say, sadness, to a degree, we are stuck there. Like, I was never a college athlete, and I keep it there. Like, I don't
yeah.
allow myself to move forward and be like, but this is what else my body can do. I don't have to be a college athlete or have that title to be able to do other cool things physically, that are just as challenging as being a college athlete. So
Mm,
I think there's a time and a place of mourning, and it sets you up for the next step in life. But if we stay there through any type of substance of numbing, we can't move and progress,
mm.
if that makes sense.
It sounds like what you're saying is the process of mourning something of that nature ultimately leads to freedom.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And no, it totally makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that the same is true of the death of a loved one or the death of
Mm-hmm.
a relationship or the end of a job or,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, no, I agree with you.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about your stay at the monastery?
Sure.
Yeah.
Um, what would you like to know?
Well, how'd you like what inspired you to do this?
Death,
Okay.
while we're on the topic.
Right.
So my aunt passed away in 2000,
Okay.
and I was just a really busy human being trying to figure out my life, and
Mm-hmm.
um, I had tons of stuff going on, and I was running just like everybody else, and I just kept feeling something boil up inside of me after she passed,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't know what to do with it. And there was a teacher I had at West Valley College who he would always talk about this monastery he would go to, and I remember when he would come back from retreats, he would just have this kind of glow about him, and
Mm-hmm.
I remember thinking, someday I'm going to go there. I'm going to go
Yeah.
there someday. And fortunately, my mother worked at West Valley College, so one day I just had this crazy idea that I'd call my mom and ask her to get the information from Randy, and she did. And I called up the monastery, and I got basically an answering machine and left them a message. And then I got a call back from Father Isaiah, and I told him I was interested in doing a 4-day retreat. He said, "Well, we don't have anything, but we'll put you on the waiting list."
Mm-hmm.
I said, "Okay." And so it was the week before I wanted to do the retreat. I got a call back from him, and he said, "Well, we have those dates available now, but uh, you'll have to spend 2 of them in one room and the last 2 in a different room." And I thought, who cares? Like,
Mm-hmm.
what's the big deal with that? I said, that's fine. I'll come. And so it was right before Christmas. It was actually over the solstice, the winter solstice.
Okay.
And I went up there, and I had the most profound release, because what I realized was I was avoiding mourning. I was avoiding dealing with the deep sadness and the deep pain of the loss of my aunt.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, let's be honest. As boys, we're discouraged from crying and showing
Yeah.
any emotion that um, makes us appear weak.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I can remember getting beaten up for it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's probably a lot of men out there who have
Mm-hmm.
been beaten up for crying.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know too many women who've ever been beaten up for crying, but maybe it
Mm.
happens. I don't know. That's not my
I think we
experience.
get shamed for our
You get
tears.
shamed. So
I
you get
think,
emotionally beaten up. We get
yeah,
physically beaten up.
yeah. I think
So so if you're watching this right now and you've ever been emotionally or physically shamed or beaten up for crying, um, let's just take a second and let that go and see if we can heal from that.
mm-hmm.
So 1 second.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if we healed, but it felt good.
Good.
So yeah, so I cried for hours. I don't know how long. It just came out of me, and I felt such a huge release, and I was just amazed at how good it felt, and but how difficult it was for me to let it happen, but
Mm-hmm.
how uncontrollable it was.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that was day one. And then day two, I found a book by a gentleman named Anthony DeMello called Awareness,
Mm-hmm.
which I highly recommend. And from 4 o'clock when I picked the book up until probably 4 in the morning, I read the entire book. And there was just a lot of information on attachment and letting go and death and things of that nature. And it really kind of helped me process. And what I realized was that the way that my retreat was set up was for me to mourn the first 2 days in the room that I was in, and then get to
Oh,
go into
fascinating.
a whole nother room.
Yeah.
Not by my doing.
Right. Yeah.
I didn't know that's what was happening. But when I got into the other room, I understood. And I spent the next few days having a profound gratitude, appreciation for my aunt, instead of feeling so sad and so angry and all the other emotions that I was feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I was there when she passed, so
Mm.
I watched her go, and so
Wow.
I had no reference for that. I didn't know how to necessarily um, come to terms with what I had seen.
Yeah.
So it was a safe place for me to let go. It was a safe place for me to be able to, reconcile the loss, but also to ponder what that experience was.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was 2000, end of 2000. I started going more frequently, and I think it was 2002. I went up for a brief visit. I was heading up north, and I stopped in to one of the services, and I sat down and I looked over, and the man sitting 2 people down from me was a friend of mine who I knew from the gym that I've first started working out at back when I was 14 years old.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Wow.
And yeah. And I was like, there's no way it's him. And so after the service, he walked outside, and I followed him out, and sure enough, it was him. And I was just like, what are you doing here? And he's like, well, I live here. I'm like, are you a monk? He said, oh no, I work in the maintenance department. And I was like, what is there to maintain in a monastery? And he says, oh,
There's a lot.
oh, oh, oh,
Yeah.
young man, there is much to maintain at a monastery. So he was a mentor of mine. He actually was one of the people who was responsible for guiding me. Him and Mark Rifkin.
Mm.
Mark Rifkin owned the gym,
Oh, okay, cool.
and Wade was the maintenance guy,
Mm-hmm.
and they both kind of guided me towards kinesiology. And anyway, so I started going up more frequently, and as a result of knowing him, I was able to go into the cloister, which is basically behind the wall, and I started meeting the monks and
Oh,
getting to
cool.
know them. Yeah, and then eventually one of them asked me if I'd ever thought about spending a prolonged period of time up there. So what does prolonged mean? He said, I don't know, maybe 3 months or something like that. And I had a lot of excuses why, because it's a scary place.
Because you have to
It's
face
scary,
your all your emotions. There's no place
and
to hide.
right, we can say you're shit. You have to look at your shit, and
Yeah.
it's not super comfortable. It's beautiful and it's amazing, but it is hard. I avoided
Pa-
it actively
Pause
for
right.
a while.
I'm going to pause you right there and just have you rinse and repeat what you just said, just because of the internet connection.
What did I tell me what I said?
I don't know,
Which one?
because I couldn't hear you.
Well, what was I leading? How far? What did you hear? I guess is the better question.
Something about your emotions, and you have to see your shit.
Yeah, you got to face your shit, and
Yeah.
it's not always pleasant, and it's hard, and but it's rewarding, and it is ultimately a worthwhile thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
However, that being said, I was able to avoid that for another 2 years before I finally agreed to the invitation to come up for a prolonged period of time, where we did it with the agreement I would basically be their personal trainer.
Oh, cool.
Did I lose you? Okay.
No, you're good.
Yeah, I would be their trainer, and I could stay in exchange for that. And so I stayed for 3 months, and at the end of 3 months, they asked if I was interested in extending my stay, and so I stayed for 3 more months. And then at the end of that 3 months, they asked if I was interested in potentially becoming a monk, and I said, "Let me think about it." And I was pretty clear within 24 hours that wasn't my path. So I said, no, I don't think that's necessarily the direction for me. And,
right.
But then I continued to go up and retreat and visit and so on and so forth. And then in 2013, I walked the Camino de Santiago. Are you familiar with this?
No.
Camino de Santiago is a 500-mile pilgrimage starting in France across Spain.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm. So I walked that, and well, for me, doing something like that, it's profoundly changes you,
mm-hmm.
but it also makes it hard to figure out, like, how do I fit again? So I decided to put myself somewhere that it would be easier to figure out what that process and experience was, but in doing so, making it even that much harder to come back out into the real world and interface with consensus reality. But basically, when I got back from the Camino, the maintenance director at the monastery offered me a position in the maintenance department, and I said, yeah, I'll do that. And so I was up there for 3 years, and fortunately there were people who were interested in partner passing while I was there, one of them being Chris the cook. And he actually was still is an awesome partner to pass with, but that stint helped me really sort of solidify some of the deeper experiences of passing, versus my earlier years were more about how do I figure out the patterns and and how do I string these all together, and what's the sequence, and
more like the structure of it.
Yeah, and this was more like the heart and soul of it.
Yeah.
And then coming out of the monastery was more like, how do I teach this to people? Like, how do I share this? And I'm still in that process of understanding what's the best way to get this into people's hands.
Yeah.
But so that comes full circle to your initial question of, can people train with each other and test with each other? Yes, eventually that will be a way.
Yeah.
In the beginning. So what I saw when I did the last full hour of passing was a group of between 12 and 16 main instructors who all come through passing with me. And then we all pass for an hour with each other. So everybody in that group knows each other, has a strong connection, and understands where that person's coming from. Because I think when you get into organizations like this, as they grow, they get so big that people don't know who each other are. Like, one of the things with Strong First is I don't know who a lot of people are. They don't know who I am, and I don't really have a relationship with them, but I'm a relational person. So I would prefer to have, more connection that way versus not. So that's sort of the bigger vision of it. And then, as I mentioned, having those people bring people through, and eventually having people go through it on their own.
Yeah. I love it. That's great. this happens. I swear this happens to me at least once a show. I have a question and it escapes my mind.
That's okay.
um, I don't remember what I was going to ask you. Oh, more books that you recommend. You said Awareness.
I love Awareness. The I Ching is a great book.
What one is it?
It's not, it is, it's great, but I Ching.
I Ching.
I Ching. What else did I enjoy? There's a book called Philokalia. It's a series of, I think, 6 books, but it's basically the early Christian mystics and saints. And the earlier books are pretty cool. It's all about love. So most books about love I'm into.
Yeah.
The Tao Te Ching is an awesome book. What else? Oh, The Lazy Man's Guide to Enlightenment is awesome.
What is it?
The Lazy Man's Guide to Enlightenment.
Okay. I'm just writing these down. Oh, this is what the question I was thinking of. I know the time that you come to Seattle, you host it at Golden Gardens in the Sand. And you do a lot of, from what I've seen of your work, you do a lot of this stuff outside. What is the importance of training kettlebells and that connection with not just the person who's in front of you, but also the connection to the earth?
Yeah. So there's a few reasons. Before I get into the importance, the main reason I do it outside is in sand, because sand is the safest place for somebody to drop a bell. If you drop a bell on grass, it leaves a big divot. If you drop a bell on a rubber mat, it takes a weird hop and hits you in the ankle. If you do it on cement, you can chip the cement. So the main purpose is simply to keep people safe. I don't know if you noticed, but you were saying, oh yeah, you see in the comments, a lot of people say, oh my God, I would be so afraid of my toes. And that's a huge fear for people.
Right.
So surface of passing is a big consideration for me when bringing beginners into the fold. Now beyond that, I love being in nature because you have to engage with the elements. So you again, it's another degree that you have to let go of control. Like I don't have a thermostat. I don't determine, if it's going to rain. Like last Sunday, it rained, it hailed. So we had to make the decision. Are we going to throw in the rain for an hour, or are we going to wait and see if it clears up? What are we going to do?
Yeah.
So I think if you think of like chi, you can collect chi in nature. You can collect it anywhere. You can also mutually cultivate it together. So it's mutual energy cultivation anyways. But why not take advantage of the energy of nature and bring that in as well, instead of being indoors. So but I still love to throw indoors too. But if I have a choice, I prefer to be outdoors. And that's the main reason. You can really tap into the vibe of a place. You can really kind of connect in a way that maybe you could do when you're hiking, but hiking is more like the relationship between you and the place you're hiking. And maybe you're hiking with friends and joking and talking, but it's not as intense. But with passing, it's intense with you and your partner, but you also you can see that you're not separate. You're not this little island, that you're a part of this bigger thing, and that it's feeding you, and that it's interfacing and interacting with you as you interface and interact with it. So that's a big part of why I like to promote outdoor training with kettlebells or anything really, but
Mm-hmm.
specifically with what I do because of
Yeah.
the relational capabilities that it promotes.
Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot to be said about being outside and being barefoot and being grounded. I think that's one of the main reasons why I love the kettlebell so much, because you can easily just take a kettlebell to the beach. And for
Right.
those who have watched my social media accounts, like I don't know how many times, like once the sun's out, like I almost took one of my bells to the beach. It was way too windy today with it being nice out. But I think that's one of the things that I love, and that has helped me heal in a way that I didn't even know I needed healing. Like I was injured at one point in my career where I needed to be outside. Like my body just craved to be outside, and I didn't need to do any of my workouts around the gym I was at because it just wasn't a healthy environment for me. So I was just like, okay, well, the only other place for me right now is nature. And that's where I think with being outside, it really grounds you back to who you are, because you have to feel with your senses. I remember like doing farmers walks at one of the parks and like not being on like a straight terrain, and realizing, okay, I have to really focus in on where I'm putting my each step versus like
Mm.
being on a turf inside a gym. So I think it just heightens the awareness in such a way that no other facility can. And again, the more awareness, the more healing people can have with that.
Totally. Did you heal from your injury fully?
um,
Are you still dealing with that?
well, let's say I've always had some type of injury that I've dealt with. I wouldn't say
Because
I'm always at like a 90% healed with my injuries, because there's always some flare ups that will come up again. So,
was it something you sustained water skiing, or how did you?
what it was overtraining. It was a lot of both.
Yeah,
Yeah. So,
both. See, that's the challenge of like being a physical being, right?
yeah,
Like
right.
you're kind of constantly in like a minor state of injury because you like doing shit, you
Right.
know?
But that's the beauty of the kettlebells. Like it keeps you all together. Well, we are like way over time. Do you have anything that you would like to add as we finish up?
No, this has been really cool. I've enjoyed our conversation and learning about you more, and I appreciate your questions and your mindful attitude.
Awesome. Well, cool.
Yeah.
Well, listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you give it the love with the 5 stars and a comment, and share it out with your family and friends. Until next time, I'll be back next week, and we're peacing out.